Welcome back to Switzer on Australia's Business Channel. Now, with the federal election looming, the Prime Minister has proposed a pact between government and business in a bid to boost Australia's productivity to 2% per annum. But critics say this is an unrealistic move and the deal or pact shouldn't be a substitute for governments actually listening to and acting on sound advice. For more, I'm joined by Nigel Stapledon from UNSW's Australian School of Business. Nigel, great to see you.
Terrific, Peter.
Now, look, in case people forget, you were a star economist with Westpac for many years. You wouldn't say that, but as someone who relied on your analysis for many articles I wrote, I remember what a star you were for me, mate. So it's great to see you again.
Thank you, Peter. Thank
My
you.
pleasure.
Very nice.
My pleasure.
Very nice.
All right, so when I read your view on productivity, you basically said that 2% is unrealistic. To a normal person, that doesn't sound too much, but why is it unrealistic?
Well, you just look at history. History tends to be a guide. What have we achieved over the last 40 years?
Yeah.
And productivity's averaged about 1.5% over the last 40 years.
So even in the good times, you know, I presume the Hawke-Keating times improve productivity because there's so many changes in that period.
That's right. So the 80s was that reform period, and important in that reform period, you've got to remember, you had the Hawke-Keating government pushing reform, and then you had Howard on the other side letting it go through. And that's important. You need a consensus to get reform.
Yeah.
And that's important when you come to debate things like GSTs and the like.
Yeah.
So, and those reforms then with a lag led to a decade of quite high productivity growth, where it was a bit above 1.5%, but still not beating that one.
It didn't improve the average.
It's still not 2%. It still didn't push it up towards 2%.
So what? And I know this is not a political statement. This is purely because you looked at Hawke and Keating making the changes, Costello and Howard facilitating and making the productivity flow through. What have you seen over the last 6 years that makes you worry about the ability of current governments to get productivity bumped up?
Well, one, there's a lack of consensus. So, I mean, I would like to, and we're going to discuss it later, see reform on taxation. But if you've got one party sort of putting a major tax reform off the agenda, that makes it difficult. So we lack that consensus, and so you've got to give credit to Hawke and Keating and Howard for allowing that to happen, and we don't have that. We have that sort of oppositional, and we've had it for a decade or more, which has made it very difficult.
I think one of the great heroes that often gets left out, but people always recognise, Kelty was so important there as well.
Absolutely.
Because he got the union movement to come across that bridge to say, we are a country, we need to improve productivity, we've got to get unemployment down, because we've got, 10.4% at one stage.
Well, that's right. So Kelty was very important. I mean, we'd come through the 70s, which was a dreadful decade of conflict between capital and labour, and then so we had a consensus to change policy, accept that the world was going to force us to be more productive in a sense.
So we need great union leaders, and at the moment we haven't got union leaders of the calibre of Kelty.
No, I don't think we do.
I don't think so either.
No.
Okay, now, so you say it's important for governments to listen to business. I presume you're saying you don't think they're listening very closely at the moment.
Well, I think it's important for them to listen to business. I think it's also important for them to listen to good advice from an independent organisation like the Productivity Commission.
Correct.
And
that's the point.
And that organisation has been sidelined.
Where's it gone to? Has it gone to a different country?
Well, exactly. I mean, we had a very talented chairman there in Gary Banks for a long period of time. The government stopped listening, and then, for example, when they looked at the car industry, they brought in their own advisors, so they sort of knew the advice they were going to get, in a sense. So I'd be a little bit critical of that trend. I'd like to see the Productivity Commission come back more central, be reinforced, and even if governments don't like what they hear, at least listen.
Is that the reason that the Productivity Commission, in a sense, has gone for the kinds of issues that are easy to sell? We now are right deep into the too hard basket for a lot of politicians?
Absolutely. We are.
I guess we should.
They don't like the answer.
No, and we should therefore move to. Well, I guess the next thing, you've been hearing about the deals for Holden and things like that. What's your reaction, not as an Australian or as a politician? But think about as an economist. What are you thinking when you see the deals on cars?
Well, I grew up in the car industry.
Right.
My father worked there.
Okay.
He built the Mitsubishi plants.
Okay.
The industry peaked in the late 60s, around 1970, and it's been downhill since. And in many ways that's a tragedy, but it's been a tragedy for the industry. And it sort of says to me as an economist that the policies that had the industry growing so substantially in the 60s were not good policies.
So is the money they're spending on car industry better earmarked for industries where we really have competitive advantage?
Absolutely. So even though I've got this emotional attachment to the industry,
Yeah.
I just think, you know, when I see, you know, there are top engineers, the workers are good, but it's an industry which just is not competitive, and we've just, in a sense, got to let it go.
Yeah, and I guess at the moment they're thinking if the dollar slips into 85 or 82, that gives them a breather. But we're going to be higher than lower, given that our resources, the growth of China in the future, we're going to go up, not down.
Yeah. Look, I mentioned 1970 for the car industry. Remember, the mining industry really started kicking off about then.
Yeah.
And it's been expanding its share of the economy for the last getting on 50 years. It's not something that's going to stop.
I remember going on holidays in 1976 and the Aussie was about $1.36 US. It was a great time to go holiday, but it wasn't good for industry, was it?
It definitely was not.
All right, so the GST. The Labor's currently using it to goad the coalition, but all the smart guys are saying we have to look at our tax base. Ken Henry said the tax base is a problem. Is there an alternative to either increasing the GST or broadening the base?
Well, I'd be a strong advocate of it, but frankly, until we get a consensus, until we get both major political parties pushing for it, I don't see it happening. I mean, I always refer people to New Zealand. You go over to New Zealand and they've got a broad-based GST, so they don't have payroll tax, they don't have stamp duties on houses, they don't have all those inefficient taxes on which we rely. So you've got it there, and we refuse to look.
Yeah, and it hasn't affected their rugby team either.
Well,
so, in fact, it's improved the rugby team.
You could say that. I'm not sure about the connection between the two.
It's a post hoc fallacy, I think you would call that. All right, one last thing. 2014. You heard me being optimistic. I think election happens, confidence kicks up, investment improves, and therefore 2014 could be better than what Treasury's predicting. Am I being too optimistic, Nigel?
Look, it's a very difficult time to be picking the economy because we are going through a little bit of a transition. So we've, mining long-term prospects still good, but we've been going through an investment phase there, which has been extraordinary in our history.
Yeah, exports and investment, big pump up of the economy.
It's been huge. I mean, you have to go back to the 1850s or something to get anything like it. And so when that sort of comes off the boil, you've got jobs being lost in the construction side over there. You've got the miners shedding. So at the moment, you've got manufacturing, mining, and agriculture all shedding labour. So I think it's a bit.
So this time, you think Treasury might get it right?
I think unemployment is going up.
I think so.
I mean, I think it is hurting.
Well, it's a lag indicator. It's going to be a reflection of what happened 6 months or 9 months ago, isn't it?
But I'm not an eternal pessimist. I mean, economies do react. So sort of go forward 12 months, and I think you'll start seeing things starting to look a bit better.
Well, if you're not an eternal...
Not quite as confident as you, though, Peter.
If you're not an eternal pessimist, Nigel, I'll get you back on the program one night.
Terrific.
Thanks for joining us, mate.
Lovely to be with you.
Same here, mate.